Well, hello everybody. Been a long time. This is my new garage shed, if you will. We've got a nice little acre of land here, but I've got a lot of renovations to do on the house, which is taking up quite a lot of my time. This is a new roof that I've built on this building, and as you can see, there's still a few things that need to be done. This was originally an old house that's on the property, and I've turned it into a garage studio, and I'm sure I'll tell you that again at another time, so I apologise if I repeat myself, but it's held me up a little bit with any sort of car work. I do find time to drive them a little bit, and I've had a few issues with the Healey. Put a few hundred miles on her, and there are a few problems that I've had to sort out, so I might take you through a couple of those little issues that I've had over the last few months since we last talked, or I last talked and you last listened. So let's go inside and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So let's have a little discussion about the teething problems that I've had with the car. As I said, the car's run really well. It's really, goes like a bullet. It's great, lots of power, etc., etc. And the overdrive has been working really well. We went on a car run down to a place in South Australia called Victor Harbour, which is a lovely little beachside town. I drove this, and my son drove the MGA, and we had a good day. It's probably about 60 miles down there and 60 back, something like that. Anyway, along one of the runs, the overdrive stopped working, and I detected a bit of a strange smell, and it just was dead. And it turned out that what happened was that I had burnt out the solenoid. Now, it had been okay, and I'd driven the car quite a lot, probably put about 500 miles on it, and I hadn't had any problems with the solenoid, and it burnt out. So I came to the conclusion that I hadn't adjusted the solenoid properly. As you know, they have two sets of windings inside them, one to pull the plunger up and one to hold it in place. And if the plunger doesn't go up quite far enough, it doesn't switch in the new set of windings, and it draws about 20 amps, and that eventually burns it out. I suspected this was a bit of an intermittent problem. Anyway, I put a fuse in the line because I thought I don't want to burn out any more solenoids. I replaced the solenoid and I fitted a fuse in, just a little simple fuse, if you can see it just in there, which isn't original, but I thought it would save the solenoid if the same thing happened again. That's a 10 amp fuse in there. Of course, the initial pull-up amperage is only for a split second, so I figured that would be okay. So I fitted the new solenoid on, and I drove the car up the street, and it was fine. And then when I was coming back into the garage, the fuse had blown. So I figured that somehow or other this wasn't engaging properly. So I pulled all the bits to have a look, and I'm pretty sure that it turns out that this linkage on the bottom here, which might be a bit difficult to see, that little piece there, which is clamped onto that little rod you can see there, and then ends up around the bottom of the solenoid pin, was a little bit out of shape. It was slightly twisted and perhaps slightly off center. So I came to the conclusion that perhaps when the solenoid was pulling up, occasionally it was binding and wasn't allowing the plunger to pull up properly. I've also got a little screw underneath that plunger, which is about 1/4 of an inch, not showing up very well on the film, but just underneath here there's a little screw, so that this plunger doesn't drop right down, because that can also be a problem. Anyway, I have fixed all that, and it seems to be working well, and until it blows another fuse, I am not going to know whether there has been a problem in that or not. So let's hope for the best, because it's while the solenoid's pretty easy to get at once you get all the cover off, getting all the carpets and covers and seats and everything out is a bit of a pain. So it's not a job I really want to do too often. I haven't driven it great distance because it's all open, and of course this is quite dangerous here with this rotating universal joint, so you have to be careful doing that, but it seems to really be working well. However, it seemed to be working well before, so time will tell with that one, I guess. But at least now, you know, I've got a fuse in the line, so it's going to blow the fuse before it pops another solenoid. One of the reasons I haven't taken it for a long drive since the Victor Harbor run is that I seem to have developed a large, well, fairly large leak of coolant, and it's coming from underneath here. As you may know, there are probably 3, 4, 5 Welsh plugs underneath here. People call them core plugs. Some people call them freeze plugs because they think they're there to pop out if the coolant in the block freezes. My understanding is that that's not correct. They're actually part of the manufacturing process to get the sand out once the casting's been done, and then they put Welsh plugs in there to close up the galleries. Anyway, one of them is leaking. At least I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Either that or there is a huge crack in the block. It only leaks under pressure, but it leaks quite a lot. And I really don't want to take the car out until I've fixed it. I don't know why it would leak. They're all new. I've fitted them all in as I thought they should be fitted, and I also used a bit of sealant around there when I fitted them. So this is a task. Now I'm going to have to pull off all this manifolding, which isn't, you know, terribly difficult, but is very annoying. I guess it's just one of the things that happens when you recommission a car that has been off the road and had a total rebuild. But in 700 or so miles, these are the only two issues I've got, and I'm really hoping that this one is not going to be too hard to fix. Stay tuned. Well, I've pulled all the manifolding off the engine, which actually didn't take too long. I had to take a few of the studs out in order to get it off those pipes. Otherwise I would have had to remove the exhaust system. But you can see the problem down there. That one's leaking. And also this one here. You can see that's leaking quite badly. I think the others are okay. There's a little bit of sort of rust around them, but sorry, it won't focus, but they don't appear to be leaking. I don't know. I can replace 3 of them at least in situ. This N1 could be a bit of a problem because of the distance between here and here. Whether I can get a hammer in to bang them up tight enough. I know there are some alternatives, you know, some rubber plugs that you can, but I'm not that keen. So yeah, I think anyway we'll start by draining the water out, the coolant out, and pulling the old plugs out and see how I go with that. But it could be a bit tricky to get them in place, particularly that one there, and I really am not going to take the engine out to do it. So there could be a bit of contortion happening there. But it's quite nice to be out in the garage again after all this time. It's quite cold here, but very pleasant. It'll be a while, I think, before I start doing any work on that. Well, I've pulled out the Welsh plugs, and I did that. Here's one of the offending plugs. I did that by drilling a hole in there and then prizing it out with a screwdriver. They didn't offer a lot of resistance, which leads me to think that I didn't hit them in hard enough, and that was the problem. These are steel ones, and they're quite thick. If you compare them to the new ones I have, you can see these are a bit thinner. I guess I'm used to working with brass. I've always used brass ones, and maybe I just didn't whack these hard enough or in the right place. So I am now going to replace them, which is going to be quite difficult, particularly, as I said before, I think this one up the back here, this one in here is going to be a real problem because there isn't much room to swing a hammer. Now, all 4 of these were leaking a little bit, some worse than others, and I'm just hoping, as Heliolos will know, there is one behind the head on the back here right up against the firewall, which at the moment appears to be okay. So I'm really hoping that that one doesn't go, otherwise I've got to take the head off. But that hopefully will be for another day. So now the plan is just to replace them. Well, there we go. They're in. And the only way I could really get them in was to put them in place and bang them with a ball peen hammer. So I hope they seal. This one here, you can see it's quite dimpled in the middle, so I'm really hoping that that one is okay. Very difficult to get at because of this bulkhead here, as I said before. Hardly room to swing anything in there. I guess you could put a small jack in there and perhaps push against it and jack it up. I don't know, we'll see. I haven't used any sealant on them. I know some people say you should. Last time I did, certainly didn't help. But these are a bit thinner, so I think they probably hit home a little bit better. Anyway, we'll see how it goes, I guess. The other problem I've got is this little drain cock here, which is leaking. So I think, it's only dripping, but it's, you know, a nuisance. I think that might come out and I might replace that with a little plug, or see if I can rework it. Anyway, that's another job.